So yeah, right as we sat down, you started talking and telling going into what I think are going to be cool stories.
Let's hope so.
So I was like, stop. We're violating podcast protocol. And I always joke like my introduction into the podcast world was Andy Stump. And we just started shooting the shit as soon as he picked me up at the airport.
Right.
And he looked at me and goes, we need to stop talking right now.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be recording in 5 minutes and then we can get it all out. You know?
Everything you got.
But yeah, I like episodes like this because we met through Guns and Gis. And, it was interesting as you were walking in, he said, this feels kind of surreal because I've been listening to the podcast since the beginning. Yeah. And, but the cool thing about Guns and Gis is it's, I said it when everybody was here. It's not just like, oh, hey, we run this course and then we make a little extra cash. It's more about building a network and a community. And I've met lots of people that I'm good friends with to this day because of that program.
Oh, yeah. And even from that, I was in between jobs and one of the guys reached out to me a week after I got home and said, hey, contact my boss. It didn't work out, but it was cool.
Yeah.
That he was there. And I love that everybody's ego was checked.
Dude, it really
immediately.
It is, and I don't think because when you say check an ego, it kind of sounds like maybe we're being hard asses or whatever.
Right.
And I don't think anything could be further from the truth. I think we just kind of set the expectation, set the vibe, and let people know how we are. And then everybody can just kind of, you know?
And I think it was that willingness to learn.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I'm here to learn cool stuff. And I'm not going to pretend I know more than you guys. So let's absorb it in.
And what's cool is we will get guys that come through the program that can outshoot me all day.
Right.
You know what I mean? We haven't had someone come through that can strangle Joao. But but if that person's out there and he attends, cool.
Right.
And that's one thing that we like about the program is it's geared towards, it's an introduction to shooting and grappling. But if you're really good at those things already, you'll still come out and have a fun weekend, meet cool people, and still learn some stuff,
Absolutely. I know I had emailed Casey and said, hey, I'm a purple belt. Is this still okay? And she said, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because everybody had something to learn and something to give.
So as a purple belt, do you feel like, I guess I shouldn't even preface it with anything. How did you feel like the jiu-jitsu was from a purple belt perspective?
It was awesome. Actually, and I in my academy, I kind of taken on the ambassador role, kind of like Rachel here.
Yeah, for sure.
And I got teamed up with Mike, and it was awesome because I like doing that. Yeah. He wanted to learn, I wanted to help him learn, and I'm watching the moves and learning at the same time. Yeah. So it really, for me, it worked out well.
And then you can also watch the moves and interpret them to a much higher degree with a purple belt understanding of jiu-jitsu. Right. And then help him out. Right. Because he was like a couple stripe white belt, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. He started like 8 months ago, maybe.
Yeah.
A year ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you know how I like to do the show then. I like my guests to introduce themselves, kind of give a little background, as much or as little detail as you feel comfortable. I know you've done some really cool stuff in the military, and we talked a little bit about that. And that was what it made me excited to invite you on the show, because I haven't had someone with your background and your experience, and my story. Like, I was drawn to aviation. It's a cool career, and I just want to dive in and talk about everything, man.
Well, and you'll hate mine because I fell into it.
Okay.
It wasn't a lifelong dream, but we can get into how that happened.
Awesome.
But yeah, Russ Torgerson, currently living in Washougal, Washington, down southwest, east of Vancouver, headed up the gorge.
Okay.
Grew up outside of Boulder, Colorado, and this will be important to the story because my dad was a City of Boulder firefighter. When I was 18, I wanted to join the fire department, had to be 21. And the fire chief pulled me aside and said, you need to grow up, you need to mature. And he said, join the military, do your 4 years, come back and see me. So of all the services, I chose the Coast Guard because of Miami Vice. I was watching Miami Vice TV show and I saw these fast boats, Coast Guard. I'm like, well, that looks cool. I'd seen the ocean one time when I was 6 years old, growing up in Colorado. And So yeah, we went down the recruiter, did the delayed entry, So I signed up in April of 84. Do the math. Yeah.
Yeah,
a long time
I was
ago.
4.
Yeah. And
I'm old now, so I don't know what that says about you.
yeah, I'm going backwards now.
Yeah.
It's going. And then boot camp September 84, and then retired as a commander in 2015.
Okay.
So 31 years, 1 month shy of 31 years.
Wow. And the whole time was with the Coast Guard, huh?
It was.
Okay.
It was. So the quick story was 2 years at a small rescue boat station in Southern California. Then when I was there, they had this new program come out, helicopter rescue swimmers. Growing up, I'd been a lifeguard, swim team. I was never a real athlete, like, a wrestler or football player. And I'm like, well, I can swim. This sounds cool. Of course, I'm 19. And so put my name on the list, went to school. And then in 86, went to my first air station in Traverse City, Michigan.
Okay.
And as a swimmer. And then from there, Kodiak, Alaska, the first group of swimmers to start the program up there.
So when they brought that to your attention, they were standing up that program just there, or Coast Guard wide?
Coast Guard wide.
Okay, so the rescue swimmer thing was kind of like a new idea that they wanted to incorporate.
Right. The job, or the MOS is what you guys would call, was Aviation Survivalman, and they added the swimmer piece to that. So when the program started, first group of guys finished in 1985. So I went in 86. So we're coming up on 38 years, and there's about just shy of 1,100 swimmers since 85.
Okay.
So pretty small group of folks.
Is that kind of, I mean, I know they don't technically fall under special operations, but as far as the Coast Guard goes, is that kind of like the standout position that people are seeking, like the studs want to gravitate towards?
Yes, and it's the one because it makes cool press, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's an exciting fucking job too.
Oh, it's awesome.
I can only imagine.
I was so blessed that, I got into it early. So, and it's one of the few jobs in the career or Coast Guard where they have numbers. So they're the first guy to graduate's number 1. I was number 68. And like I said, they're up to about, I think, just shy of 1,100 now.
Wow.
So
for people that are just completely unfamiliar with the Coast Guard, because all the jokes and the memes are like, they're not even really a branch of the service.
Right.
But they absolutely are.
Right.
What's kind of the, like, just the main mission of the Coast Guard, if you could sum that up?
Well, and I don't have them memorized anymore, but there's actually like 11 mandated missions.
Okay.
Obviously, now the first one is Homeland Security, search and rescue, aids to navigation. So all your buoys, any navigable waterway, Mississippi River, that's all. That navigation piece is all done by the Coast Guard.
And the Great Lakes as well, yeah?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Living marine resources, fisheries. It's really a hodgepodge.
Okay.
Smallest uniform service, I think still it's about 40,000 people total, and that's worldwide. And then I can go into the trivia piece. So 1790 is when it started. So we're the oldest continuous sea service.
Wow.
Because the Navy was disbanded right after the war and then came back on.
You might be the second oldest agency in the whole country, right?
The Marine Corps?
Well, the U.S. Marshal Service prides themselves on being the oldest agency, and they were founded in 1789.
Okay.
And so,
there you go.
Right behind us.
I had no idea.
So I say that like I'm still with them. Ugh.
Right. But yeah, so 1790, and then over the years, other agencies got absorbed because like the U.S. Life Saving Service was a separate department. And over the years, it got absorbed. And I think right around, somebody will check my math, I'm sure, but around the 30s is when the actual Coast Guard as we know today, from there on came through. So we've been in every armed conflict since 1790.
That was my next question. Are you guys allocated with duties of actually engaging enemy combatants if they get too close to, I mean, is there like a international water line, and once it's past that, the Coast Guard gets involved, or?
Well, yeah. And like the first Gulf War, Marines go in, Coast Guard, they call them port security units, go in with or right behind the Marines. So once the Marines take a port, The Coast Guard secures it and
Okay.
operates it, and then lets the Marines continue to do what they do.
Oh, so you guys have had presence in all of the international conflicts as well.
Absolutely.
Interesting. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So I've run into guys that I worked with that had been in Afghanistan. And then we have ops that run, narcotics, Central America, South America.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much now that I know of, but back in the heyday in the late 80s, we had guys full kit down in the jungle.
Well, and there was that viral video that went around, what was it, 4 years ago or something?
Oh, that guy's a badass.
Jumping on a sub.
Yeah.
So they're still in the mix on that stuff.
Yep. So they call them MSRTs now. Forgive me if I got my acronym, but it's...
We can only remember so many acronyms.
That's right. Maritime Safety Response Team or Security Response Team.
Okay.
And
that was inadvertently the best recruiting tool to ever happen to the Coast Guard, I bet.
Oh, it was. And it put them back on the map.
Yeah.
Because people are like, oh, what's the Coast Guard do? Because half the time people are like, oh, are you like the National Guard? Are you guys reservists?
Yeah.
They don't understand. And the best way for me to describe it, at least from my career, is you take a little mix of law enforcement, EMS, military, and you kind of mix it all up, and that's what you get. So
Interesting.
Yeah. So we
and I know from a Army guy standpoint, there are certain MOSs in the Coast Guard that guys will transfer over to because you get to keep your military retirement.
Right.
And, if you've been in the regiment for 10 years and you have 20 deployments, that's not conducive to family life. So I know people will switch and find a MOS that suits their needs, especially aviation, which we'll get into.
Yes.
And it's a cool opportunity to keep your military service going, but be relatively available for your family too.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, it's most of my life was spent standing duty, and it's similar to a fire department where you're 1 day on, 4 days off. Or every fourth day you have 24-hour duty.
Okay.
So when you're there, you're 24 hours living, sleeping, eating, usually flying a training mission and then standing by for the alarm to go off and whatever that may bring.
Okay.
And you never know what you're going to get.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And you probably have countless stories.
Yeah.
So this podcast, I don't have anything until 5 o'clock, so we can go for a long time.
Well, yeah, we can keep, tell me when to be quiet.
No, dude, I like this.
So,
And yeah, we talked about that a little bit at Guns and Gis, because when I wanted to switch into aviation, I was kicking that idea around, because again, I'd already done a lot of deployments, and I thought maybe going into aviation with the Coast Guard would be a good option,
Right.
And when I went and talked to them, they laughed at me. Said we don't bring guys in for aviation.
Sorry? Yeah.
Yeah, I said go do that in the Army, and then once you're done, you can talk to us.
Right. Right.
And we all know how that played out.
Yeah, and I think, again, that same conversation, I've flown with guys in the Coast Guard that from all the services, Air Force, Marines, Navy, Army, because they got tired of living in a GP1 tent and the sand. And so, and it was funny because they come with a lot of skill.
Yeah.
A lot of skill. But you had to train them the Coast Guard way.
Did you ever have guys transfer from TF 160th?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm sure you would know if they did.
Yeah. Well, and I know, those guys, as far as the Army goes, are considered the cream of the crop.
Yes.
And I know that they're very, there's a lot of team cohesion and unit pride. But at the end of the day, I'm sure there's some pilots that, okay, it's time to make a decision for my family as opposed to the unit.
Right.
And I could see that happening.
Yeah.
I
never ran across them. Doesn't mean they weren't there. But it's funny to take a guy that can fly nap of the earth all day long, which Coast Guard typically doesn't do. But then you take him offshore at night and just watch him crawl on the side of the cockpit like, I'm a little uncomfortable right now.
Yeah.
Because you can't see anything.
Wow.
So it just different kind of flying.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the Coast Guard gets a lot of credit for that. You talk about that video of the guy pounding on the sub, and then the other one was Hurricane Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
Coast Guard stepped up. The admiral at the time that was running the Coast Guard was awesome, Admiral Allen. And he's like, get out of my way, hold my beer, and let us do what we do.
Nice.
So that really upped the game and visibility as well.
Nice. So then as a rescue swimmer, what was that life like? You were a young kid, part of a cool unit.
Yep. And, too dumb to know better.
And you obviously never went back to the fire department, so that tells me you liked it.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I forgot to get out. I just kept enjoying it. It was really interesting because I was so new in the program and the program was evolving. And when we first started, we used the Navy Rescue Swimmer School in Pensacola.
Okay.
So that's where I graduated from. So we did all our other aviation survivalman training in North Carolina, go to Pensacola, do that course, and then you were a qualified swimmer.
Okay. Did that involve dive certs as well, or is it all just surface
it's all
stuff?
surface.
Okay.
All surface. But the Coast Guard quickly saw that they could do a better job, and our equipment, the quality, and what's the word I'm looking for? Just the technology.
Okay.
Like we used to get hoisted with a harness that came up under our arms.
Yeah.
No leg support. My lower back shot. And then the Coast Guard said, well, that's not very smart. And so now they have full like climbing type harness that, when they get hoisted, they're taking the weight on the hips and where it should be.
Yeah.
And then we opened our own school, and then started doing it all in-house. So none of it goes outside the Coast Guard when these guys get trained.
I see.
So currently part of that curriculum is EMT school as well. So you're a EMT and a swimmer.
Okay.
When you go out on the calls. So a typical crew in the helicopter I flew was 4 guys. So you had an aircraft commander, a co-pilot, the flight mechanic, who was the hoist operator, and then the swimmer.
Is the hoist, ours were just called JPs or jungle penetrators. Is it the same type of concept?
Well, it's what you attach to the hook. So
Yep.
we have slings, baskets, litters, and that's all carried in the aircraft. So depending on what the mission is, it will tell you what you need.
Got it.
So.
Is there, not to go off on a tangent, but we were always told anytime a JP is coming down or if we're sling loading something out, it has to touch the earth to ground before you touch it, or it can really fuck you up.
You can get zapped.
Is it serious, or is it just gonna knock you on your ass? Or
ever grabbed an electric fence?
Yes,
It's similar.
okay.
Yeah. And at one point we were carrying like grounding straps, so a piece of cable that went to your kit, so it would hit first, but it became a big pain in the ass. So everybody stopped using them, and you just
eat
take the chance. Yeah. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen.
Yeah.
And it will light you up, and you're gonna wish that you had gone to the bathroom before that happened. Yeah.
That's all that stuff that the military it's just normal life for us.
Right.
But when you tell a story to someone that's like outside of that lifestyle, it sounds absurd.
Mm-hmm. Well, and everybody's like, "Oh, thank you for your service." When they find out, "Oh, you're a veteran," and I'm like, "If you knew how much fun I had in the service, I owe you tax money back."
Yeah.
So,
well, bro, that's a good perspective to hold. I like hearing this story because it seems like most veterans get out pretty disgruntled, pretty burnt out. And I was also in my whole, like the guys that I went in with that are now retiring, it was just the war was raging the whole time.
right.
It took
right.
its toll on people emotionally too, not just physically, but if you could actually mix up having good times,
Right.
I could see how it would be a much more enticing career.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, what do we have? Guys that have done their entire career at war,
Yeah.
and I think that's never happened before.
I don't think so either. Afghanistan was the longest campaign that we've been a part of.
And that's a lot of wear and tear, both physically and mentally.
And it's kind of bizarre now that you'll have guys that went in the Army in 2018 and did a 4-year enlistment and never deployed. It's like, what? How's that possible? But it's just the landscape of combat right now,
Right. Yeah. And our deployments typically, aviation wise, we'd go on the ships, on the Coast Guard cutters.
Okay.
But you're talking 30 days, 60 days. I did a 90-day deployment, which was a super long one.
Yeah.
For us, that was all down in Central America and off Mexico, off South America, doing counter narcotics.
And can those cutters go anywhere on the planet? They're outfitted to do that?
Oh, yeah. And a lot of them will go with a naval fleet like going to the Middle East. There's a lot of times there'll be a Coast Guard cutter in that mix.
Okay.
So, and the laws are a little bit different because the Navy can't stop a ship at the high seas. The Coast Guard can.
Oh, I see. So they have you with them as like almost like a loophole to have authority to do different missions or whatnot.
Yeah, and what they call OPCON, the Operation Control of the Ship, would shift to the Coast Guard the minute the guys left the ship, did their boarding, and then come back, and then it went back to the Navy OPCON.
I see.
So, and those guys are specialized. You know, you talk about close quarters combat. You know, they're training to do that on a ship.
Yeah.
With hatches, metal hallways.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah.
From a CQB standpoint, you know, poking your head through a hatch is almost like an addict, you know.
Yeah. And those teams train with all the folks you would know.
Yeah.
You know, we've even had a couple of guys go to Navy SEAL, finish Navy SEAL school.
Okay. I mean, it makes sense. It's the mission is so similar in a lot of ways.
Yes.
You know, I actually think the SEAL teams kind of got away from their bread and butter based on the landscape of the wars that we fought in, you know? Because I remember at the time when 9/11 happened and I was already in the regiment and then SEALs started deploying. We're like, what are they doing here?
Right.
You know? Right. But at that time, everybody wanted a piece of the pie, you know?
Yeah. And they did well, but you're right. It took them away from the original core.
Yeah. Did the Coast Guard ever have any presence with the anti-piracy stuff around Somalia and the Gulf of Aden and all that?
I'm sure they did, but I can't speak to it.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
We're not going to violate any OPSEC.
Right. Right. Otherwise, that means I have no idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been all over the world.
Okay.
And that's what I liked about it. And like you said, it was still a rough lifestyle, but you're not deploying for a year and not seeing your family.
Dude, I don't know how those guys do it.
Yeah.
Because in the regiment, our deployments were 90 days. And one time we got, it was actually when the rest of the regiment invaded Iraq.
Okay.
And so we were in Afghanistan. It was March 19th of 03. And our PL came into our hooch, and we were out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Afghanistan. And he said, hey, the rest of the regiment just got deployed as well. So we have no relief coming. We're not sure how long this deployment's going to be. And I'll keep you guys updated as we hear stuff. And it ended up being 6 months. And to Rangers, it was just like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where you got a lot of straight leg infantry units they were doing 18-month rotations. That's a PCS move.
Yes. Absolutely. So yeah, ours typically were 4-year tours. So you're at a unit 4 years before you move, which was nice, good and bad, because you get embedded in the community, you build that tribe, and then you're like, okay, we're out.
Okay. So you can't be like, hey, I like this area, or my wife has a job here or whatever. You're still going to be moving around quite a bit with that agency.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And I know in aviation, depending on what airframe you specialized in, a lot of guys, like C-130s, they'd go from Elizabeth City, North Carolina to Kodiak, back to Elizabeth City, back to Kodiak. You know, they do that. They do their time, but they had units they preferred, and they would fight for that.
What would be the reason of moving guys around if they were content where they were at?
Who knows, well, at the command level, they want to share that, give everybody a chance to have the command.
Yeah.
And then and the working level, I can't tell you exactly why or what makes sense.
Yeah.
But they, and it works because, I used to like that because you show up at a unit, you may have a boss you don't get along with, but unless he showed up the same time you did, he could leave in a year, leave in 2 years, you get somebody new. So there was always a flow of ideas and different leadership coming through there. So
yeah, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But I don't know budget-wise now if they're going to slow that down because it costs a lot of money to PCS folks.
For sure. Yeah.
So if you had a place you liked to be able to stay there, but then the fairness scale of some guy that's stuck in a place he doesn't like, and he says, hey, I want to go to that unit. Well, sorry, it's full and it will be full. Yeah. So I don't know how that plays out.
No, that makes sense though.
Yeah.
So then as a young kid, you got your rescue swimmer cert. And where was your first duty station?
Traverse City, Michigan. So northern Michigan. So we covered Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. which is as close to Alaska as you can get without going to Alaska.
Yeah.
In the wintertime
Yep.
up there. And then from there, we went to Kodiak.
Any crazy stories from those places?
The Michigan one, we had just started I'd only been a swimmer about a year before I got called to go help set up the new unit in Kodiak.
Okay.
And then, and you say crazy, define crazy. So,
well, I mean, I'm sure you got lots of crazy stories from Alaska, but do the Great Lakes actually get like rough and stormy and stuff?
Oh, bro, I was stationed in Traverse City, Michigan, and Detroit, Michigan. So southern Michigan, and that was the busiest unit I was at.
Wow.
It was in Detroit. Because everybody had a boat and nobody knew how to use them.
Yeah.
And then in the winter we had ice fishermen. And that's a different breed altogether. Like we picked up the same guy in the same spot almost exactly a year apart. His favorite fishing spot, and the ice broke up on him, and almost exact same spot twice.
That's nuts, man.
Yeah. And they would.
So what, they're just out on the ice? Yep. With their little hut or whatever it is. Yep. And if the ice breaks off and they start floating away.
They're screwed. Yeah. I've seen brand new vehicles go in the ice. Again, a different breed. And sometimes it would be a missing person, and they have these little fishing villages they set up. And I remember one night I must have walked 2 miles from hut to hut to hut. Hey, we're looking for Joe. Is he here? Hey, looking for Joe. Is he here? And come to find out, he was at his girlfriend's house, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we had a lot of that. So we
busted.
Yeah. So we, SAR, search and rescue. A lot of times we call it search and return. So we spent a lot of time looking at the water, and every one of those missions, every single crew looked at it like if it was their dad, mom, sister, brother that is missing.
What a great perspective to hold.
Yes.
Yes. To keep the humanity in it.
Yes.
Because I've heard of stories. One of my buddies that's a physician that's been involved in a lot of different surgeries and stuff. He's like, there's doctors that will be like, I just don't really feel like doing the surgery right now. We can put it off till the morning. And, a doctor said to my buddy, he goes, if it was my mom, it'd be a different story, but I've already worked 10 hours a day.
Right.
And my buddy's like, every patient needs to be looked at like it's your mom. What are you talking about?
Right.
I think that's important because it is somebody's mom.
It is. And I know from your background and your dad being a commercial fisherman, that's the worst thing I could think of to happen as a spouse, to have your husband lost at sea.
Yeah.
And if we can even find a deceased body, at least it's, in my mind, it was closure.
Yeah.
And obviously we look within limits. We're not going to look for 2 weeks, but there's
logistically you can only do so much for sure.
Right. And there's a lot of technology, and it grew even in my time of currents, different types of search patterns, the way the wind's blowing, of like the most likely spot that you're going to find somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But
does that shit play out kind of how you guys expect it to after analyzing all the different weather patterns and tidal patterns and shit?
It does, but more than once I've found guys outside that pattern.
I see.
It's not a hard, fast game, and say like, oh, don't look outside this, and a lot of times I would make a run outside of whatever that pattern was for a couple of sweeps, and often you'd be able to find them. So it was close, but it wasn't perfect.
Yeah. No, I can imagine like you've had a lot of profound impacts on families, even in rescues where you have a bad outcome. I know I was involved in a QRF mission in Afghanistan where both pilots and both crew chiefs were killed, but we were there and we extracted them and we brought them back. And, I didn't contact the family until 14 years later.
Wow.
I found the guy's wife on Facebook.
Okay.
Because one of his patches came off his uniform. And it sat in my nightstand for 14 years.
Wow.
And I would look at it and think about that night. And then for some reason, I was like, I bet this guy's wife and children would want to have this little piece of history.
Oh, absolutely.
And I was like, part of me was like, I don't want to pull the Band-Aid off a wound that like they have put in the rearview mirror. But at the same time, it's part of his story. So I found her on Facebook, reached out, told her the story, and she was so grateful just to be able to ask questions about that night.
Right.
You know? And that's what she said. She goes, you know, he flew for the 160th, and you would think like the family would be taken care of, but a lot of details about that night, the family was left in the blind.
Okay.
And she said having that piece of his uniform and knowing somebody that was there was like so healing for the family. And, you know, I didn't know if it would or wouldn't be, but in hindsight, like I tell people, if you have some details about somebody's, you know, an operation where somebody was lost, like share that with the family.
Yes.
You know, because that's a part of their history and it really helps them, you know?
And it's great that you were able to find her.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that love-hate with social media. That's using it for good.
Yeah, for
being
sure.
able to find that. Because, you know, back in the day, we didn't have that ability. And it was a mixed bag. There was oftentimes people would come back to the unit, you know, a week, 2 months later and say thank you. But a lot of the times, you know, we always wondered what happened to that person, particularly if like we were able to actually save somebody.
Yeah.
And usually we would land wherever the closest point was for a hospital, an ambulance, you know, a higher level of care, and they're gone. And then we just go back, clean up, and start all over again. So some of those you wonder what happened to them.
Did you struggle with the emotions of that? I mean, was that tough?
At the time, no. Later, yes.
Okay.
And we can get into that a little later on too,
For sure.
Because that PTS is real for anybody that serves, and I don't care if it's a local law enforcement all the way up to special forces guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you know, and our twisted sense of humor comes from that as well.
100% it does.
You know,
yeah.
it's a good mechanism as far as I'm concerned, but it has to be with the right crowd.
Yeah. No, there was a video that went around Instagram about a month ago, and it was cops making jokes about a lady that was struck by a vehicle and killed.
I saw that was right down the road.
It was in Seattle somewhere.
Yeah.
And like everybody was like freaking out on him. And I remember thinking like, man, I've said some real off-color shit in really bad times. And I would hate to have had a body cam go out to the entire planet.
Yep.
And it's like, on one hand, they have to know that, hey, this is the world you're operating in. Everything you say and do is going to be scrutinized. But at the same time, if you're seeing something that's really heavy, sometimes that dark humor just helps you push through in the moment, and then you can process those emotions later.
Right.
You know, because at the end of the day, you can't be, in your case, you know, like going into a storm and be crying or feeling sad. Like you have a mission to do.
Right.
You know?
Well, it's that compartmentalization and that we're all good at.
Yeah.
And it works, but at some point you can't keep those boxes all closed.
Yeah.
And they come bubbling up. Yeah, like one time I picked up a guy, it was in Detroit, he was a fisherman, brought him in, started doing CPR on him. And again, you're trying to save a life. And all of a sudden I look at him like closely, and he looked just like my dad. Like almost an exact twin of my own father. And I was like, this is weird.
Yeah.
You know, so we experienced that. I always joke I picked up more deceased than I did live. But that's okay. It's part of the job.
Well, I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, you're there to do what you can do. And in the battle space you're occupying, a lot of bad stuff is happening.
Yes.
You know?
Yep. And well, we talked on the way in the door here. You know, it's if you save one, I was blessed because I've saved more than one. But in your lifetime, if you were able to have a family come to you and say thank you for saving my son, daughter, husband, if you get it one time, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And in this career, you get it more than once.
Yeah, that's pretty special.
And
man.
so it was cool.
Like making a real impact. You know?
Yes. And it was, you know, it took a while. So I told you my dad was a firefighter.
Mm-hmm.
And when growing up, and I grew up in the firehouse, and same thing. I never saw Dad really at work. are doing his job. I'd see him at the firehouse. It wasn't until I was a rescue swimmer and I was into it a couple of years, had a few cases that didn't turn out well. Then he finally opened up to me about the stuff that he had actually done.
Yeah.
Everything we heard was the
now
good
you
stuff.
can understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to have that collateral damage with your kids or your wife, to be able to share that with them. And again, that's why you hang out with your homies, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you trust those guys that have lived it and done that.
Yeah.
And that's why that tribe, we always talk about the tribe. That's why that's so important.
Super important. Yeah, I remember when I got home from my first deployment in Afghanistan, my dad's best friend was a Force Recon Marine in Vietnam.
Okay.
And he never said anything to anyone. Even my dad was one of his best friends. They were friends as children, and then he went into the Marine Corps and served in Vietnam. And when he came home, they resumed their friendship and were best friends until my dad passed. But he never talked about his service.
Right.
And then when I got home from Afghanistan, he came over and poured a drink. And I almost felt guilty because the stories he was telling me is like, I have no business. Like my experience in combat was 1%
Right.
of what he went through. But just knowing that I had tasted it, he felt comfortable being able to share that with me and have a conversation. It was pretty special, man.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's, I'll bring it back to Guns and Gis. You're building that tribe and trust.
Yeah.
And I think men in our world now, currently, don't have that.
I don't think so either.
And what you're doing and everything else with Fieldcraft and several of the other podcasts, they're trying to push that.
Yeah.
And what I can't figure out is you can't make somebody do it. And I think how do you get them? How do you get them there? From sitting on the couch, being a potato.
Yep.
And they don't have to be a, IBJJF champion jiu-jitsu guy, but they have to be engaged.
Yes. My whole mindset has shifted on jiu-jitsu over the last few years for that very reason. Because initially, in jiu-jitsu, they say jiu-jitsu's for everyone. And, when I was young and phenomenal shape, I just wanted to smash. And I just wanted to become the best athlete that I could be. And even when I opened this place, it was still kind of the mindset, like, dude, let's build a team of killers. And it's cool. Like, our reputation precedes itself in the area as a tough team, and we have great jiu-jitsu. But what I inevitably found is if you're only trying to hone men that are already pretty savage, what you're doing is you're excluding a massive amount of your community that needs this place.
Right.
And it wasn't until, a few years ago when I made a conscious effort of being like, how do we make everybody feel comfortable here? And how do we bring in, the mom that was, sexually assaulted when she was younger and still has PTS around that, or the guy that's super overweight and lost his ways but wants to get back in.
Yep.
And I honestly think the biggest key is make your facility family friendly.
Agreed.
Because once people see that this is a safe place for kids, then the moms or the guys that are out of shape are like, you know what? If my 9-year-old can be here doing it, I think I could give it a try.
Yep. And I watch for those guys.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
And I'm like, hey, and if they start trying to coach, I'm like, yeah, no.
You don't know what you're doing.
But if you want to come do the adult class, I'll give you a buy on that. So
that's a whole other episode that we could do. But it's very bizarre to me that a lot of parents are. It's almost like they're tempted to coach when they clearly don't know anything.
Right.
And I've had dads be like, I can't remember exactly what they were saying, but it was something along the lines of like, pass his guard. What are you doing? Pass his guard. And I look over and it's like, it's a kid mounted on another kid, right? It's like what you were yelling from the sideline has literally nothing to do with where the grappling match is taking place right now.
Right.
But people are just compelled to do that. It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, just stand up. Yeah.
Dude, just stand up has become like an internationally recognized jiu-jitsu phrase now,
Yep. And to your point a little bit earlier, that jiu-jitsu is for everybody. And I tell folks, again, I've taken on the unofficial role as ambassador. I'm like, jiu-jitsu is for everybody that wants to be here.
Yeah. Yep, for sure.
And I tell guys the 2 hardest days is the first day you show up. When I started, I sat in the parking lot for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Talking myself out of it. I was 30 pounds heavier than I am now, drank too much, no confidence, or I had lost my confidence. I'd lost my tribe.
Yeah.
And I walked through that door, and the second hardest day is coming back the second time after you go, holy crap, what is this?
Yeah.
I just got smashed, and I don't know if I like it, but I think I'll stay with it.
Yeah. So, I mean, inevitably, we're going to take a deep dive into jiu-jitsu here in a little bit.
Yeah, I kind of got you off the Coast Guard topic. So.
Bro, I mean, you know what's funny is like, there's a part of me that was starting to be like, dude, is my show too much jiu-jitsu? You know, like, because I love jiu-jitsu and it's my life. So I inevitably talk about it very often. But then I get people that hit me up that are like, will you please do more shows about jiu-jitsu? We love hearing about jiu-jitsu, you know?
I think it's a good mix.
Yeah.
And I'm a little biased because
Of
that's
course.
my new, lifestyle.
Yeah.
But I think it's good. I think it's good for people to hear, and I've heard a lot of your different guests that are different levels.
Yeah.
From black belt to brown, but like Big Will was on the
Yeah.
last podcast that just came out.
Yep.
What a great guy.
Dude, he's so awesome.
I can talk about old man jiu-jitsu
Uh-huh.
and that journey, but I think, some of these guys that I want to target, that 35-year-old dad that lost his way,
Yep.
and maybe he started, and I think you talking about it is awesome.
Well, bro, that's one of my most common emails I get. I got one this morning. It's
Okay.
like, hey, I was going through a real rough patch. I was super depressed. Me and the wife were falling out, and I was eating and drinking, and I was unhealthy. And then I heard you just say, just try jiu-jitsu. Just try it.
Right.
And people won't usually write me very like early on. I'll get emails that are like, so 8 months ago I signed up, and now I'm down 40 pounds.
Okay.
And I'm the happiest I've ever been. Me and my kids are doing, like, my relationship with my kids is better. And I tell people, and I know it sounds crazy until you experience it, but jiu-jitsu mirrors life. And as you become a better person on the mats, the other people in your life inevitably feel that. And there's a better energy between you and your friends and your spouse and your kids. And it's a real thing, man.
Yeah, I was actually, I had this conversation last night. My buddy who I'm working with now, we had elk steaks and a little red wine, and we were talking about he was a Marine Corps pilot, and we were talking about our transitions. And when I left the Coast Guard, I was ready. I was excited to try something new. And then I entered the civilian workforce, and it took me a long time to realize that I didn't trust anybody.
Yeah.
And bringing it back to jiu-jitsu, you have to trust your training partners because you can get hurt.
Yeah.
If you don't trust them. And so finding, again, I'm overusing the word, but I love it, that tribe that you can trust. And, we had a couple of years ago, my 55th birthday, my wife said, hey, who do you want to have at your birthday party? And I said, no family, just the academy.
Yeah.
So we had like 60 people over, and I celebrated with them.
And it's because they are your family now.
Oh, absolutely.
What is your academy? Give them a shout out.
Lone Wolf Jiu-Jitsu.
And what city are they in?
Washougal.
Washougal.
Yep.
Okay.
My professor is Don Stoner.
Okay.
He was a Higan Machado black belt, and now he's affiliated with Fabiano Scherner.
Got it.
So Fabiano was American top team in Portland, and now he has, I think we have 8 affiliates,
Okay.
primarily in the Portland, Vancouver metro area.
Got it.
So, and we have so Professor Don, I think, been at it about 5 years. I was one of his first students, and it was Fight Club.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later. And everything's been refined so well, and our kids program is just taken off.
So it sounds like you kind of came to the same conclusions as
Yes.
I did here, because like, especially if the gym is being started by a good black belt that came up, old school jiu-jitsu was just kicking the shit out of each other.
Right.
And when I was down in Los Angeles training with all the checkmat savages, We go to practice and we fight each other as hard as we possibly can.
Right.
You know? And I love that. And I'm not saying like that's not the way to do it, but there's a difference between training with competition guys. And I was never one of those. I would compete, but I was never one of those guys. You know what I mean? There's levels to it.
Yep.
I was in the room with them and I was getting my ass kicked by them, but there's just always something different about a handful of the guys down there that were they just had that next level of jiu-jitsu.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And now what I say is like, dude, Joao and Buchecha can just beat the brakes off of me. Cool, right? That's like their technical jiu-jitsu is better than mine, and it always will be. But you know where I can stack up against the best of them is building culture and building a gym that brings value to your community. And in my opinion, that's probably more rewarding than a bunch of world titles. And I'm not saying that to take anything away from them, because Joao's he did both.
Right.
You know, a big portion of his life was chasing all of those world titles, which he got. And now he is like, his primary focus is doing what I'm doing now.
Right.
But my point in saying that is you don't have to be a 7-time world champion to build a place that A, has good jiu-jitsu, but B, really enriches people's lives. And that's our mission, you know?
And we see it over and over again. And what we did there at I say we, I've been with him long enough. I feel like it's my academy too.
You're damn right it is.
And we started a ladies cardio kickboxing, kind of on a whim. Well, let's see what happens.
Yep.
It took off because like my wife, she does not want to do jiu-jitsu. I can't.
Same as mine.
But she has the same family, different tribe with her cardio kickboxing ladies.
Yeah.
And they get after it. And then we've added in some Muay Thai. And so like my wife and I will go to Muay Thai together, and it's cheaper than marriage counseling. But it's awesome. And so, because I need to work on my stand-up game, and hers is better than mine.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you this though, man, I got sick of getting punched in the head.
Yeah.
Those days are behind me.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and when I started, it was all self-defense. That's the one reason I didn't recognize what the benefits would be. And of course I heard it on, Rogan, Jocko, you weren't around yet doing this. And I'm like, well, it sounds kind of cool. And I grew up, Chuck Norris was my hero, that timeline. And I'm like, always wanted to do martial arts. And I'm like, well, I better try this jiu-jitsu thing. And it's cliche, but it's true.
It's true.
It's the story.
Yeah.
We hear over and over, and I never get tired of it.
Me too, man. And it's one of those things where, the big influencers, I guess you'd call them, like Rogan and Jocko, and the people that saw the value in it, that had a massive reach, it permeated so many different aspects of our culture that now, like, man, there's jiu-jitsu everywhere now.
Right.
You know? And because like once you go in and you try it and you see it and you feel it, most people buy off on it. One thing I always say is I've yet to meet the person that committed 90 days to jiu-jitsu and regretted that decision.
Right.
Now I will say this though, because one email that I get, not often, but every once in a while, it's like, man, I hear all these powerful things about your academy and what it does for people and all these stories from other people. Like when I go to practice, man, like everyone just kind of seems like they're down in the dumps and they don't talk to each other. And so there are academies out there that are not doing a good job at building culture. And whenever I hear those stories, I said, don't allow that to put a sour taste in your mouth for jiu-jitsu.
Right.
Because inevitably, when a person opens a gym and they invest the money in it and they're leading the classes, they're going to set the tone for the culture initially. Like, I don't take credit for the culture in this gym anymore because I actually, when I say my gym, I actually did this in an Instagram post yesterday. I wrote my gym and then I went and edited it to our gym.
Right.
Because it's not me anymore.
Right.
And Lappin talked about that yesterday on the podcast that dropped. It's like Vita Jiu-Jitsu isn't Greg Lappin. Yep. It's 225 people that have formed a tribe. That's the goal. And then once you set that culture and enough people buy off on it, then it sustains itself, And if the wrong people show up, they usually see their way out. I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't last long. I don't know what they're looking for, but it's not what we have.
Yeah. And so I tell people that if you go to a gym and you don't like the vibe, go try a new gym.
Right.
There's no shame in that. You don't owe any team anything. And then at the end of the day, that's not even necessarily saying they're a bad team. It just might be a different energy.
Right.
You know?
And yeah, we have a good mix, male and female, and I have 5 daughters, so that's important to me.
Yeah.
Is that the ladies feel comfortable.
Do any of your daughters train with you?
No.
No? Okay.
Nope. So I'm a middle class Jerry Springer show. So my oldest is 34 and my youngest is 14. So
okay. The 14-year-old doesn't want any, huh?
Nope. Doesn't want anything to do with
Man,
it.
my 14-year-old is my assassin.
I like it.
You know?
I like it.
But also, I always tell people, like, my 11-year-old wants nothing to do with it. And she won't step on the mat. She has no interest.
Right.
And I go back and forth because part of me thinks it's my duty to show her the power of jiu-jitsu. But I also don't want to push her into something where now I've ruined the chances of her ever coming to jiu-jitsu on her own accord.
Right.
You know?
Well, and I think you're doing it right, from my opinion, is let them make that decision. And she may never do it. She may never come to the mat. But all we can do is set an example.
Yeah.
And obviously they know that lifestyle and they've grown up with it. And I just hope that someday she does. You know, kind of my kids, I've almost begged them to come train, and they're like, yeah, no, that's your thing, Dad.
Yeah. And I have to check myself there too, because it's like my passion doesn't have to be everybody's passion.
Right.
Exactly.
You know? Yeah.
Because I'm sure there's people that are part of basket weaving clubs that are like, this is the shit. This is what everybody should be doing.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
hey, are you still doing bingo on Thursday nights? That's awesome.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, and I said it at Guns and Gis, because at Guns and Gis, we go have a big bonfire and we sit on the beach and we eat food and we talk about all these different things. And I doubt that there's 30 people on a beach grilling steaks talking about karate anywhere.
No.
You know what I mean?
I will take that bet. There's not. There's not.
Something about the culture of jiu-jitsu really bonds people. And I did it all too, man. Like, I fought MMA. I did tons of striking and boxing and kickboxing. And I'd been part of a kickboxing gym and stuff. And don't get me wrong, I like all that stuff. I was glad I did it. I think it was a good part of just developing as a man.
Right.
Like, I think you should be able to fight outside of just grapple. I think it's a good skill set to hold. But it was never what jiu-jitsu is. And I don't even know if I can necessarily put my finger on it. Well, here's a theory I came up with recently, so you can tell me what you think. I think, because you know how they're talking, like, they're starting to discover that when human beings ground to the earth, there is actually an exchange of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and they're able to measure what it does in your body energetically.
Right.
So it's no longer like some crazy shaman that's high on mushrooms saying, touch a tree.
Right.
It's like, oh no, the science actually supports this stuff. I'm wondering if we ground on each other while we're doing jiu-jitsu. Because if I am doing a boxing round with you, there's no real connection.
Right.
Other than the fraction of a second that my fist is touching your body.
Right.
But when we get on top of each other, and like people, I still get emails like, dude, that shit's gay, dude. And it's like, come do a round, and I promise you, there's nothing sexual about jiu-jitsu.
Right.
You can do jiu-jitsu rounds with the hottest girl in the world, and there's nothing sexual about it.
Right.
Because that's not the energy that we share on the mats. But I do think there's a level of intimacy. There's, like you already said, there's a level of trust. And for you to have your body connected to another human being for 6-7 minutes at a time, as soon as the bell rings, man, like, you went through something with that person,
right,
and it bonded you.
Well, and I think there's some validity to your grounding theory.
Uh-huh.
I really do. Because actually, our brown belt, shout out to Ollie, he's always throwing that stuff at me.
Yeah.
And the quasi-conspiracy theories, but him and I were electroculture, talking about that, throwing some copper wires in my garden. It works. It worked. And
you met Tyler, right?
I had a long conversation.
Okay.
Yeah,
bro. And I tell Tyler this all the time. If I met you 5 years ago, I would have been like, hey, this guy, needs to be put in an insane asylum,
Yeah.
right? Because he does that. Little copper wires around his saplings and like learning how to direct energy and stuff. Well, you know what I just bought last week that him and another guy recommended was these, and I'm going to butcher this. I don't even know what they're fucking called, but they're basically like a copper coil that you put on a fan. And the movement of the fan generates energy from the copper spirals or the copper coils and pushes it out into your, like people will put it above their beds and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it's not, he said, you can take the fan blades off. It's not the wind pushing this. It's literally the energy from the coil being expanded through the movement of the fan.
Yeah.
And he goes, bro, when you put these in your room, you'll feel better. You'll feel healthier because it's putting a positive energy into your body. Bro, I'm open to all of it now.
Yeah. Well,
and I bought them, and it was $400 to do every room in my house. And if it's all in my head, then maybe it's all in my head, but I'm open to it.
Right. Yeah.
You
So,
know?
and I'm at a beautiful age because I'm getting older. I'm 57.
Yeah.
And now it doesn't matter to me anymore.
Yeah.
I don't care what people think. And I can be that crazy conspiracy theory guy. And as you get older, you get away with it more.
Well, then, but also like, you've seen that meme going around, I'm sure, that's like, hey, there's no more conspiracies left because they were all proven to be true.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So it's like the more crazy shit that comes out, and then people are like, oh yeah, well, that's actually true. And this is actually true. I mean, our fucking government is saying in Congress, talking about aliens.
Right.
you know what I mean?
And imagine 30 years ago, we would never have that conversation.
No. And if anyone said that, like, I think that there's probably beings on Earth that are extraterrestrial. You're the crazy guy.
Right.
And now they're on the congressional floor saying, yeah, what I forget exactly how he phrased it, but they're like, they are not human. What was it? Do you remember the word he used?
I can't remember. Oh, I know what you're talking about though.
And I was like, the way he worded it was just like, just say you have fucking aliens.
Yeah, they're among us. They're among us.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And you know what? The world we live in now, I'm almost numb.
Yeah.
Because nothing surprises me anymore.
It can't, man.
It's so now
it's kind of freeing though, right?
it is. And it's cycling back to the tribe again.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm going to worry about my tribe. And I watch enough news to be informed without getting pissed off.
Bro, that's a tough balance.
It's a fine line. It's a
very fine line because there's something about things that aggravate us that suck us in.
Yes.
But the other side of it is sometimes, like the phrase that I use is stay informed but not consumed.
Right.
I
like it.
So I saw that video, and I actually shared it last night, of Chris Christie talking shit to Donald Trump.
Yes.
And bro, some people were mad about that. And I was like, dude, I'm not even like taking a political affiliation here. I'm just like, it was just an absolutely ludicrous moment in American politics. And I watched it and I just started laughing. And I showed my kids in the back of my car. They started laughing. And I was like, dude, everybody's getting a laugh out of this.
Yes.
I'm going to share it, you know? But I had some people like, well, I'm unfollowing you now. And it's like, what? But here's the thing. You try and appease everyone, you appease no one.
Right. Well, and that, I turned on that debate actually.
Oh, did you?
For about 3 minutes.
I was going to say,
I'm like, this is a time waste. And then I'm thinking, this is the best we have?
Dude.
Anyway.
I go back and forth on that too, because the people that are drawn to politics are typically the wrong type of people.
Right.
But men like you and I aren't in there because I want no part of that, But the right people, they don't want any part of that because leadership is a burden.
Right.
And
I think there's people that do go into it with the right mindset and thinking I'm going to make a difference. And after about 6 months of dealing with that, they realize that they have to be part of the machine.
Yeah.
If they want to continue.
It's real bizarre.
Yeah.
Like I've heard Tulsi Gabbard talk about, like anytime I bring her up, people write me like, she's a fucking bitch. I was like, dude, I actually like a lot of the things that she says.
Right.
And, but it doesn't matter. Like anybody in any type of position of power through politics, there's a certain percentage of people that hate them. But one thing interesting that she said is she would go down to the congressional gym and work out with Dan Crenshaw.
Okay.
And some of the people on the Democratic Party like pulled her into the office and were like, hey, like we don't go work out with Republicans. What are you doing? And it's like, man, that's what they're focused on. That's what you're worried about.
That's the big picture right there.
Exactly.
Problem.
That's the problem.
Yes.
That's a little microcosm that is showing why this country is where it's at right now. You know?
And you talk about the people that write you, and we've lost that, what is it, civil discord, to have a conversation and disagree.
Yeah.
I was talking to my wife, Chris, on the way up here, and we were talking about your podcast, and I said, no, I love what he's doing. Do I agree with everything he says? No.
Well, how could you? You know what I mean?
But that would never stop us from being friends.
Yeah.
And if the point comes and the point in time that we can discuss that, we'll do it civilly and be able to agree to disagree on whatever it is.
Yeah, we're in a really weird place culturally where the divide is getting bigger and bigger, and the two sides just they're not congruent in any manner. And it's like, where does this go? You know, for me, it goes on my sailboat or a cabin in the woods.
Yep.
Because at some point, it's like, I don't want to be part of all this bullshit anymore. You know?
Yep. And same in my family, because we were, we're not a Glover level preparedness. But like that 30-day target, and we have different power, no power. Type plans, but she was like, election's coming. I have to stock up.
Well, I mean, if you've been paying attention over the last few election cycles, and maybe it's by chance, I tend to think it's by design.
Yep.
But a lot of bullshit starts to happen.
100%.
No
doubt.
And I think it's because they want people operating from a place of fear and confusion, and then they can pull all their bullshit.
Right. Yeah, no doubt about it.
And I think more and more people are starting to feel the same way.
Yeah.
And so what will the solution be? In my opinion, it's the next little stunt that they pull. They'll probably have to turn the heat up a little bit.
Yes.
And so if you think being prepared is silly, like, I don't know what to say at this point.
Right.
And one thing that I hear very often when people talk about this is like they think being prepared is coming from a mindset of fear, and it's the opposite.
Right.
Taking a couple steps, and like you said, you're not on Glover's level, but you've taken some steps to have just that peace of mind that if I need to fall back on these things or these resources, we took the time to plan ahead and make it happen. Now you're good.
Right. Yeah.
All that stress is gone. It's not a place of fear. It's the opposite of that.
Right. And we had that play out in our house during COVID. 'Cause we live on 5 acres. Nothing changed for us. Nothing.
Yeah.
And I see all these people having meltdowns and a lot of extra stress and fear. And we never experienced it. We're like, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes me happy to hear. But I'm not going to let you just glaze over the rest of the Coast Guard stuff.
Okay.
We're going back to the Coast Guard stuff.
All right.
Because I would like to hear about, well, I know you probably always hear this and hate this, but what was the Kevin Costner movie where he went and he was the rescue swimmer?
Oh, The Guardian.
The Guardian.
Yeah.
And like, maybe, I'm sure Hollywood has a way of say that word for me. Dramatizing.
Just like that. Yeah.
Dramatizing everything. I'm struggling. But fuck, man, like, I can only imagine that you've experienced very similar stuff to that.
Yeah, I don't know. People would argue. You'll probably get hate mail for this too, but they probably got it 60% right.
Okay.
A lot of it was Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when a helicopter's out on a mission, they're not watching in the big screen at the Op Center and all that bullshit. And some of the swimmer training stuff was a little over the top, but really not far. And those, my brethren there, and of course I'm an old guy.
Yep.
So, but, and it kind of morphed, and I'll get back to the movie, but it morphed from almost being a collateral duty job to being an absolute, focus. And these young guys, they're beasts that I see now, the new guys.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to joke that we were professional athletes because we got paid to work out.
Yeah.
But you had to, because you never knew, your missions could be, one day you're out, saving a guy that his boat's sinking. The next day you could be in the woods medevacing a logger, because we did that as well. Day after that, you may be looking for a criminal because the local sheriff's department doesn't have helicopters, but they call the Coast Guard and say, hey, can you help us out? We're looking for this guy.
So you're just wearing all the different hats.
Yeah, that's why I said it's a mix of being a EMS, law enforcement.
What was the op tempo like? Like, would you get spun up on real world, regardless if it was the logger or a sinking boat? Like, are you doing real missions every couple days, or is it every couple weeks?
There was no rhythm.
Okay.
No rhythm. I mean, you could have a duty cycle where you had a case like 1 or 2 even on a duty day, and then you could go a month and a half with nothing.
Okay.
So and there's, even with the few number of swimmers, there's some guys that didn't even get a case because it just wasn't their time.
Yeah.
And there's other guys. A friend of mine has like 4 air medals, a DFC. He just was always in the right spot at the right time.
Yeah. No, it's interesting you say that, because I saw the same thing in Ranger Regiment.
Yeah.
A lot of guys like got all the sexy missions and they're just right place, right time.
Right.
And then a lot of times I got slotted on QRF where you're sitting on an airfield for 2 months.
Right.
And reading books and fucking just being bored out of your mind.
Yep. And so it was similar.
Okay.
And every unit was different. Like you talked about Kodiak. Those guys, primarily you're dealing with professional fishermen.
Okay.
Which is good and bad. And that lifestyle.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of like ranchers that know their craft.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't ever call for help until it's too late. And, in a place like Alaska, you have the tyranny of distance. And so when they finally accept that, we may need some help, a lot of times it was too late.
So it's like their own ego.
But I saw that starting to shift probably 10 years ago.
Okay.
To where they were getting a little bit smarter about it, and keeping the ego in. Like we talked about checking your ego to say, you know what, we have problems. Not sure if it's going to be a big one or not, but we're going to call the Coast Guard and see if we can get some help.
So from Kodiak, what would be like, I guess the perimeter of like area that you could potentially conduct a rescue? Like,
well, depending on what aircraft, it was the entire state.
Okay.
Yeah. So like C-130, and I did do 3 years. So I flew for 17. I was a swimmer for 13 years. I'm sorry, 11, enlisted 13. And then I went to OCS flight school and I was a pilot for 17 years. And 3 of those years was C-130s.
Okay.
In Alaska. And
man, so you flew fixed wing and rotary wing.
I did, but my standard joke, I'm a helicopter guy at heart, and all my best friends are helicopter guys. And flying C-130s was like riding a moped.
Uh-huh.
It's a lot of fun, but you don't want your buddies catch you doing it,
Yeah.
And are drinking a Zima,
Yeah.
So the C-130s were all over the state, and then the H-60s. So we had 3 different airframes there. So the H-60s were on duty in Kodiak, but
that's your version of the Black Hawk, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And then in the summertime, they were forward deployed to Cordova. So we had a hangar in Cordova. Now they're also forward deployed up on the North Slope, up in Barrow.
Okay.
And then during crab season, they would deploy to St. Paul Island. In the middle of the Bering Sea, smack dab in the middle. So
that's crazy.
So they didn't have to transition like the Alaska Peninsula, in January in a blizzard to go help somebody. They were a little closer to the action. And
then you'd stay forward deployed for
typically the crab season.
Okay.
And I forget how long that ran, but it was several months.
And everybody's familiar with that shit from The Deadliest Catch.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that show did a great job. And you were talking about The Guardian. I think the Deadliest Catch also did a good job of portraying the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
And what we do and what we are capable of.
So my cousin has a commercial crabber on that fleet. It's called the boat's name is the Handler. You ever come across the Handler by chance?
I don't think I have, but.
And they asked him to be on the show lots of times, but he's like, I don't want more responsibility on the crab boat.
Right.
Like, I'm not interested in that at all.
Right.
And so he never took him up on it. But he used to tell me, like, when I got out of the Army, he's like, why don't you come do a couple seasons with me? I'm like, I'd rather go to Ramadi any day of the week.
Yes.
And patrol downtown before I got on your fucking boat and went and did a season on the Bering Sea.
Yeah.
Not interested.
I have friends that invite me, like they like to fish off Astoria, go outside the bar and go salmon fish. I'm like, yeah, no thanks. I'll stick with fly fishing in the streams and in the mountains.
I love the ocean, but I don't want to purposefully go out in conditions that are life-threatening.
Right.
And I've been in conditions that maybe weren't life-threatening, but are pretty fucking scary.
Right.
And it's not enjoyable.
Right.
Well,
I've been deployed on a cutter in the Bering Sea in January, and it's not fun.
God,
there's nothing fun about it.
So you talk us through a rescue operation of, like, if a boat starts to go down, how does the Coast Guard respond to that? I guess there's probably a lot of different ways depending on where they're at and how many crew members and all that shit. But what does that look like?
I can summarize it in general terms.
Mm-hmm.
So you're at a unit, say like my last unit was North Bend, Oregon. So, and you get a call for a sinking vessel, say, and they call on channel 16 radio. They give a position. We launch the helicopter. Depending on, in that case, a sinking vessel, we have dewatering pumps that aren't carried in the aircraft all the time. But when that's the call, you throw one in.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the way out there, before you take off, you're looking at weather, looking at distance, looking at secondary fuel sources, if there's, a field closer than home plate to go to, et cetera. So you're mission planning. And the mandate was airborne in 30 minutes.
Okay.
From the call. And majority of the time we were quicker than that. On the way out, you're talking to the crew. And the beauty of that is the aircraft commander is in charge of that aircraft. He signed for it. It's 51% of the vote, but to the person, and that's the professionalism at play, they get input. All right, guys, we get out here. Let me know what you think, and we'll look at, depending on the rigging on the boat, can we hoist the pump down directly? Is it going to go to the bow, going to go to the stern? What kind of rigging's in the way? All the hazards. So we'll do a couple of orbits, and let's assume the weather's not a factor. Maybe it's pitching and rolling a little bit. And we'll typically with a hoist like that, we use a trail line, just a polypro line that goes down with a weight on it to help. And then the crewman on the boat will start helping pull that line as the hoist's coming down, just to keep it from swinging. They'll disconnect it half the time. They don't know how to run the pump, even though they're fishermen. So that's when you're going to, all right, we're going to put a swimmer down there to help you out. Or if it was a medevac, first thing you do is put the swimmer down.
Mm-hmm.
Always. Then he assesses the situation. And that's where these guys, my brethren, you're solo. You don't have the option of getting a second opinion. So, you're talking anywhere from a 22-year-old kid on up that's qualified is making calls.
Yeah.
And as a pilot, you're listening to that call and you got to trust what he's saying. And so it could be something where they can put somebody in a basket, or maybe they need a Stokes litter and somebody's hurt bad enough they have to, stay prone. And I don't know if I'm walking you through this. Like
no, I like it. Yeah. It's perfect.
And, as a pilot, you're always thinking about your fuel. That was critical. And then also the hazards. I've hoisted to a sailboat. You can't see from the pilot's seat. You can't see because you're so high because of the mast going back and forth.
Yeah.
You literally can't see. And that's that trust. Your flight mechanic, he's trained to talk you into where you're going. Where it would get dicey if it was at night and you didn't have a lot of visual cues to hold a steady hover. Hovering in an airfield with trees and buildings, easy. They don't move.
Yeah, but you have no reference point.
But if you're looking at a reference that's moving,
Yeah.
You're naturally going to try to follow that movement, and it's his job to say hold, forward right, right 20, speaking in feet, and he'd talk you in right 10, right 5, easy right, or forward and right depending on where you're going. Hold, come up, come down, and so you're flying by his voice, if that makes sense.
It does. It's wild though.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of talks with I'd go to schools and talk about the Coast Guard, and I'd get 2 kids and I'd lock them shoulder to shoulder, and I'm like, okay, that's your pilot, you're the crew, you can't move unless he moves, and I'd throw a dime on the gym floor, and I'm like, I need that dime between both your feet, and so you would go through that whole thing. Okay, forward, to go right, go left, no, right, the other left. Just as an example, what that looked like.
Were you usually in Blackhawks for those type of missions?
I never flew an H-60. I flew the H-65.
I'm not familiar with that one.
So it's bright orange, has a fenestron. It was actually a French helicopter.
Okay.
Came in service in 84, 85, right about the time I came in the Coast Guard.
Are they big? Are they bigger?
They're smaller.
Smaller. Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of a sports car. It's converted to a pickup truck.
Okay.
So very utilitarian, but the cabin's not big. And depending on the size of, if you had multiple people to pick up, you couldn't always pick everybody up at once.
Okay. So would that determine the airframe too, then I guess, based on the size of the vessel or the people?
Well, Kodiak and Clearwater, Florida are the only 2 units that have, actually Clearwater only has 60s. So Kodiak has both H-60s and 65s.
Okay.
But usually it's unit specific. So the 65 is finally getting phased out, and they're putting 60s at most of the units. So
they don't use any of the big birds like the 53s or the Chinooks, huh?
No.
What's the reasoning for that? Because aren't the Chinooks like just fucking beasts in rough weather?
They are. And I used to crew in what they called an H3. That was like a school bus with a rotor head on it. It was huge, and it was amphibious. And those got replaced by the 60s. Partly it's being able to deploy on the ships. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So the newer cutters can take a 60, but 99% of the time the deployments are done by the H-65 crews.
I see. Okay.
So, and if I show you a picture, you'll go, "Oh, I've seen that helicopter."
I know it has like a pointier face or nose, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The claim to fame was it was always in the opening scene of Baywatch. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, that was a sample mission. Very, very simple. And what was fun and frustrating is dynamic. It changes. It changes all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you would get a call like, "Hey, we're taking on water," and then it would turn into something totally different.
Yeah, dude, isn't that just the case with everything?
Yeah. So
that shit would happen in Afghanistan all the time. You get an intel brief or an intel dump, and you plan around something, and you think you're hitting like an HVT target, and it's just all bullshit. Everything is just completely backwards. Yep. It's like, so how is this possible?
So a lot of similarities with what you've experienced in your military career. And one thing, and this really came to light in Katrina. Our training is so standardized that you can take a pilot from one unit, a co-pilot from another unit, flight mech, and a swimmer that don't know each other, have never met in their life. Throw them in that aircraft, and they will get a mission done like they've known each other for a lifetime.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And we pride ourselves in that.
Because I know most units have SOPs for that reason. But like, if you want to clear a building with 4 dudes you've never met before, good luck.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because you just learn how each other do business. Right. You know?
And but yeah, it's standardized across the board. So the training syllabus is a Coast Guard training syllabus. Now, some units you're going to get a little different training. Like when I started hoisting and learning how to actually fly the aircraft, I was in North Bend, Oregon. So we had a lot bigger seas than a counterpart that went to Miami.
Yeah.
And was hoisting in seas as flat as this table most of the time.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you gain experience based on the unit you're at, like cliff rescue. A majority of the units aren't doing cliff rescue. All your Northwest units are trained in it constantly. But it's a standard syllabus that guys are taught across the board. And then we have Advanced Helicopter Rescue School in Astoria twice a year. So they bring crews from all over. And they play in the big seas. They play in the cliffs. They're doing urban search and rescue now.
Okay, so they get exposed to all the stuff that they don't typically see.
So guys from, I'm picking on Miami, but from Miami will come up here and experience that, learn it, put it in their toolbox, and just have that ability to go, oh, I remember when I learned this.
Yeah.
And they may get stationed to a unit that does it all the time, or they may go somewhere that doesn't have it at all, but.
So when I think of you getting Mayday calls and ships going down, I typically, like, my brain goes to the deadliest catch with 50-foot waves. But is that a misconception, or is it like
it is?
Is there bad shit going on all the time, even on days where it's flat and calm and sunny and
absolutely
they hit a deadhead log or something and they're going down?
Yeah, or injuries, both medical and physical injuries. We're all like. I hoisted a guy off New Jersey. Again, I'm pointing to the table, but flat, calm sea. But he had gotten his arm caught in a winch.
Yeah.
Bringing in a line, and so he's mangled. And so, a lot of times the weather isn't the issue. It's just getting out there, finding them, and making sure you can get them up safely and get them back to help. I had a really big case. It was off of Delaware. Beautiful night. It was no moon, but flat, calm seas. And when the alarm goes off, the operations center will tell everybody what it is. And the pilots usually run to the operations center to get all the real info. But I was on duty and the alarm went off, and it was a 540-foot freighter that was caught on fire. And we were looking at each other going, did we hear that right? And so they were hauling, I forget how many million metric tons of ethanol. And they had a guy grinding on a deck and exploded the ship.
Dang.
And you'll actually see it in The Guardian. It's when they're in the classroom and they're watching videos of rescues, and there's a ship that's sinking. That was that case.
That was it, huh?
That was that case.
I'm going to watch that movie again now.
Yeah, there you go. And I'm in the helicopters. You see it fly by. Can't see it.
That's your claim to fame.
Claim to fame.
All right, I want your autograph after this.
But it was a horrific night because they had just had left New York and were transiting down, had all that ethanol, all their fresh bunker oil, fuel. They were full.
Mm-hmm.
And when that ship exploded, it exploded all their tanks. And I don't know if you remember the store Spencer's that sold all
Spencer's Gifts, of course.
And those.
When I was a private, I used to blow my entire $300 paycheck there for new Pantera posters. And
there you go, and a black light.
Yeah.
But the wave machines that had like the oil that kind of slowed it down. That's what it looked like. It was just covered in oil. And we had flown over, so we responded from the north, and then Elizabeth City responded from the south. And that's the way the wind was blowing, north to south. So there was 27 crewmen, and I forget how many they actually rescued. Some guys were able to get into a lifeboat, and the H-60 picked those guys up. We're on the other end of the scene, and there was several bodies that obviously were deceased.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're flying around, C-130's flying cover for us. A lot of times when you had a big case or an offshore case, they'd launch a fixed-wing aircraft to be a comms platform.
Okay.
Because we're so low, and then your radios start pooping out on you. And I'm flying out there. I'm getting the brief from the two pilots. Again, never met them. And I'm like, well, what do we know about ethanol? And the pilot's like, well, I never met an alcohol I didn't like. So, and I'm talking to my crew, and I'm like, what do you think, guys? And they're like, we don't know. And I'm like, well, so we kind of did a spiral effect. I'm like, if at any time anybody feels weird, we're out of here.
Yeah.
And so we got down low enough. We found some folks that didn't make it. And we're just about ready to leave. And in this oil sheen, we see a hand come up, just a hand. And
is it daylight at this time?
Dark.
It's dark now.
It's nighttime. And
so you guys have like massive spotlights on these birds, or
spotlights, NVGs.
Okay.
Yeah. We flew with NVGs, and a big spotlight. And we see this hand come up, and I'm thinking, okay, that's a live guy down there. He waved to us barely, and I didn't want to put the crew down. And again, democratic, we talked about it, and I said, okay, we're going to put you in, but you do not detach from the hook. Because I had no idea what he was going to get into.
Yeah.
How toxic it was. And he's a great guy. I'll shout out. His first name's Z. And he's like, I'm going down. And
dude, give me chills, man.
And I had been in that position before, like decade before that as a swimmer, where I wanted to go down and the pilot wouldn't let me. And I watched Dad and his son die. And so I'm like, okay, bro, you're staying on the hook. Are we clear? He goes, yes, sir. Got it. And so we hoist him down. He picks the guy up. And when he came up, you couldn't see anything. He was just covered in oil. Him and the guy.
Whoa.
Just covered. And so we brought him in, and the guy was, again, sick humor. If they're alive when I drop them off, we did our job.
Yeah.
But he didn't make it. And one thing, weren't able to use any oxygen, because I'm like, yeah, there's too much oil back here.
Yeah.
We're not going to introduce oxygen into this. And the cabin looked like a slip and slide by the time they were done. So yeah, we got him back, got him the ambulance, and found out later that he didn't make it.
Yeah, man.
So, but those are those split second, like you as a cop, those split second decisions that you have to make.
Yeah. I don't think anything I did as a cop rises to that level. Man.
My brother, I say brother, we've been best friends since we were 3. And he's a commander at a department in Colorado, and he's been in law enforcement 37 years. And we swap these stories all the time. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I wish I would have done that.
Yeah.
And so we all have a perspective.
Did you find that doing the job of the rescue swimmer yourself for a long period of time made you have a better relationship with those guys as a pilot?
100%.
Okay. Because it's like the enlisted guys that become officers or platoon leaders, if they were privates and sergeants first, they just have a better understanding of how everything operates. And I would imagine it'd be the same thing with you.
Yeah, it was black or white. Either they were awesome guys or they were pricks. And so there was no in between.
What made you decide? You said you were 11 years in as a swimmer, and you said, I need to make the switch to become a pilot.
So I'm glad you asked that question. It's actually a pretty good, funny story to me anyway.
Let's hear it.
So we had always looked at pilots, at least for me, like on a higher level. Number one, they're officers. Number two, they're flying our aircraft.
Yeah.
But near the end of my time as a swimmer, I was trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do with my life. Because at that time I had 2 kids and I was a E5, and I'm like, well, I can continue in, but then what's it look like on the outside? Am I going to be a professional lifeguard?
There's not a high demand for rescue swimmers in the civilian world.
I was bouncing that around, and I had started taking some college courses on the side. And one night we're coming back from a case. We were down in Lake Huron, flying back to Detroit, and my 2 pilots were fighting. And not physically, but I thought it could have. And I kept sitting in the back on ICS going, who's flying the airplane? Who's flying the airplane? Because they're like finger pointing, face to face, screaming. And we landed that night, and I'm like, these guys are idiots. If they can do that, I can do it.
Yeah.
And the things that we talk about and things that I did, I want to, and you guys probably have the same feeling. We're just regular guys.
Of course.
We just got trained and we're put in positions and blessed to do what we did. Doesn't make us special. It's just what we chose to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, after those 2 guys were fighting, I remember I got off the helicopter and I threw my helmet across the ramp, and I'm like, this is bullshit. I'm like, if they can fly, I can fly. So
then obviously the Coast Guard did have a route to flight school if you were already in.
yeah, OCS.
Did a lot of guys go to flight school as members of the Coast Guard, or were you kind of the exception?
No, every OCS class, Officer Candidate School class, would have a handful of guys that would go to flight school.
Okay, but they would all be prior enlisted. Is that correct?
Prior enlisted or ROCS, when you got formed up in your class, was either it was going to be prior enlisted and guys out of college that would apply for OCS, and so those guys were brand new to the Coast Guard. So OCS was like 17 weeks long.
Well, the reason I say that is because when I went to a Coast Guard recruiter and inquired about aviation, they laughed at me.
Right, because
so it must be very difficult to get into then for the amount of slots that you guys get.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I couldn't get in now with my past of and the crazy stuff I used to do as an enlisted guy.
Yeah.
And there was no cameras, thank God.
Yeah.
Or if they were Polaroids or somebody had the negatives, but it wasn't digital media. So yeah, it's very competitive. And I think in your case, because you had to be an officer to come in. So you would have to come in, enlist in the Coast Guard, and then try to go to OCS, and then apply for flight school, and then go from there.
So when you go to OCS, it's kind of needs of the Coast Guard at that point.
Right.
And you don't know where you're going.
Right.
I see. Okay.
And again, blessed, I went to OCS, and I got turned down for flight school. And I never take no the first time.
Of course not.
And so I reapplied.
You can't in the military.
And I didn't find this out till years later. One of my commanding officers, right before I went to flight school, was working in Coast Guard headquarters. She was an 06. And she was walking down the hallway and heard my name mentioned. And it was another 06 that was doing all the approvals or denials of these waivers. And she said, "Is that Russ Torgerson you're talking about?" And he goes, "Yeah, we've already denied him once, and I'm getting ready to deny him again." And she's like, "No, you're not. He's going."
She hooked it up.
And I had no idea this had gone on until after I got out of flight school.
What was the reason for denial? Do you know?
I was too old.
Oh.
I needed an age waiver. And
you were what, 30?
32.
Okay. Super,
and you had to be
super
like
old.
31.
Yeah. The military is crazy like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, but at the same time, like, you're not a normal candidate. You're a guy that's done that job for over a decade.
Right. And it helped greatly, like to your point originally a few minutes ago. I didn't have to learn how to run a mission. Like a good friend of mine, we went to OCS flight school together and our first unit in North Bend together. So he was brand new to the Coast Guard. I'd been around 13 years, 11 in aviation already. I'd been in the helicopter. I'd been on missions. I knew how they worked.
You literally just needed to learn to fly the bird.
Exactly. I learned, how to keep us dry.
Yeah.
And go from there.
And they sent you down to Rucker, yeah?
No, we go to Navy flight school, Pensacola.
Oh, okay.
Milton, Florida.
Okay.
Just northeast of Pensacola. So we do our primary, and if you get helicopters, you stay there and do your helicopter training. And then our main base for the Coast Guard is Mobile, Alabama. So then you go to Mobile, and then you learn your airframe that you're going to fly.
Got it. So when you were slotted to fly helicopters, at what point did you also learn fixed wing? Was that all part of the same program?
No, I had been a pilot for like 8-9 years.
Got it. Okay.
And it was part of a transfer. So going to Kodiak, my boss and I were both going to show up the same time. So 2 brand new guys. He outranked me, obviously. And one of us, they didn't like, because we both were 65 pilots. And they said, one of you has to be C-130 pilot. I lost that jaw. And I'm glad I did.
I was just going to say, like, hindsight, you're probably happy about that, huh?
Yeah. And I was in my aircraft commander syllabus right before when I got orders to go back to the helicopter. I'm like, don't waste your time. I'll be a first pilot the rest of my time here because I'm going back to the helicopter. So I didn't want to waste somebody else's slot learning that.
I've heard that the C-130 is one of the most impressive airframes.
Oh, it's a war machine.
Yeah, and the entire there's stories, and I don't know if these are confirmed or if these are old Ranger wives tales, but of when we were invading, I don't know, remember if it was Panama or Grenada, but where 3 of the engines were shot out and that airframe is able to fly on 1 propeller. Do you know if that's true?
I don't know. I wouldn't want to be in that plane.
No, I wouldn't either.
I don't want to test that theory, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Okay.
I mean, the way it was designed and built, and I used to joke, I'm flying my grandfather's aircraft. You know, and the saving grace for me, because as a helicopter guy, we kind of have ADD, because, you know, in a helicopter, things are always happening.
Yeah.
And you're always looking for that next place to land safely, because you're not going to glide much.
Well, and for people that understand, like in a helicopter, both hands and both feet are being used the entire time you're flying.
Right.
Like that's kind of fucking crazy to think about.
And in the C-130,
could you unpack what that kind of what's going on in that with with your cyclic and your collective and both feet
and your pedals? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and again, you don't have to be special. You just have to learn it. And it's learning. It's kind of like jiu-jitsu. When you get a white belt and he wants to muscle a move, it's not going to work. But if you finesse the move, you're going to be so much better off. And I remember learning in flight school, and my instructor's like, quit squeezing the black out of that cyclic. You know, you're nervous and you're like, okay, we're going to hover for the first time, and you were everywhere. But then you learn, I can hover with 3 fingers, relax my hand. And, you know, a lot of it's visual. So you're outside, inside, outside. And when we learned to hover, so he would run the collective and the pedals. And he's like, you're just on the cyclic. Okay, now you have the cyclic and the pedals. So you're keeping your nose pointed in one direction. And then you would add the collective, which is your power. So that's what creates pitch in the blades, up and down. And then it would all fall apart. He'd be like, okay, I have the controls. He'd reset, he'd do it again. So, but after a while, you learn that if you're smooth, it is so much better than just that stress of like,
Yeah.
But that's why we trained so much. So,
well, fucking in jiu-jitsu, that took me over 10 years to really hone that.
Well,
you know?
So you
even today, I'll find myself going against 25-year-old super athletes, and there's a part of me that wants to just ram heads like a fucking bighorn sheep.
Right.
And I'm like, no, just relax.
Yeah.
And that's where you'll actually do better.
Right.
So
that's the analogy. I love tying things back into jiu-jitsu.
Always, dude. If you didn't, I'd be offended.
It's kind of like so you're training for a competition, and I'm master, so I do 5-minute rounds. Screw your 7-minute stuff. That's too much.
We're doing 6 tonight.
Okay. I got 1 or 2 in me.
All right.
And you train that way. Then you go to your tournament, and you have a 6-minute round, and you're about 2 minutes in, and you're like,
dead.
I'm dying.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's that stressor, right? So you fall back to the lowest level of training. And so same in the helicopter, you know, and we would train a lot, both hoisting and just emergencies, just, you know, to keep those skills honed.
Man, it's fascinating. Listening to all this stuff is making me sad that I didn't complete flight school.
Right.
But I always, you know, the world of aviation during the war was pretty gnarly.
Yeah.
Lost a lot of birds. So I always have to tell myself, like, there's an RPG somewhere with your name on it, and the universe had other plans for you.
Well, and that was
the
difference between us and a lot of the DOD flying is we didn't have anybody shooting at us.
Yeah.
We just had Mother Nature trying to get in our way. And Darwin.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've heard some of the stories of the 160th guys, like, going over mountain ranges and stuff, like really putting testing the limits of their airframes.
Yes.
With the thin air and the clouds and the dark. And it's like, it's a gnarly career, man.
Yeah. And then when you leave that, you're like, now what?
So what was that like? I mean, did you arrive at a point where it's like, you knew it was time to retire, or was it kind of mandatory firing, as they call it in the government?
No, I could have stayed on because I had made commander.
Which is 05.
Okay.
Okay.
So much to my surprise, I made commander. And I at that point I was with my wife, and she's from Gresham, Oregon, right near where we live but just across the river. And my only two choices were Washington, D.C. or a repair facility in Elizabeth City,
Where's Elizabeth City?
North Carolina.
Okay.
So,
So
an hour south of Virginia Beach. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And then the thing that topped it all off is I had worked my way I used to work with the mechanics on the hangar deck. I managed maintenance, and I loved it because they were my guys, my crew and gals. And then I worked myself into an office job that wasn't on the hangar deck. And so I had admin, medical, supply all under me.
Yeah.
And one of my swimmers was in the admin where my office was, and he was a jokester. And I would always holler at him, and I was kidding around. I'm like, "You need to leave." I said, "You're harassing the help." He's like, "Yes, sir." And 180 went out of there. 2 days later, one of the gals that worked in the office came in my office crying, and I'm like, "Uh-oh, what's up?" And she's like, "Oh, do you have a minute to talk?" I'm like, "Sure. The other day you referred to us as the help." And I find that very, and I turned around, Greg, right then, as soon as she left my office, and did my retirement letter.
Yeah, you just saw the direction everything was going, huh?
Yeah. And I feel bad. I think you may have talked about this a couple episodes ago about would you join again, or would you encourage people to join the military now? My nephew joined the Coast Guard. He wanted to live my life. Yeah. And mileage may vary because what he's experiencing was not what I was able to experience.
For sure. And it's really sad because there's still a lot of young men and women that are hungry for these experiences. But just the current culture and climate of our government, I just can't in good faith tell people, go do that. Yeah. You know,
well, my son was trying to get in, and he had a medical that he couldn't. He tried different services, and it finally, MEP said, "Nope, you're disqualified." And he was heartbroken. Still is. But we had that conversation last week, and I'm like, you know what? I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing at all. Yeah. And so it's also because we're older now. And, I remember when I was joining, there was the Vietnam era guys. There's that some of them are like, I wouldn't fucking serve, blah, 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 and part of me wonders, is this kind of the natural progression as we get into our 40s and 50s and look back on that and just look at military service through a different lens? Or is it literally the climate of our government and our culture shifting so much that it just doesn't make sense anymore?
Because I think it's the latter.
Because, dude, I mean, you can't even joke. And since when is calling people to help an offensive thing?
Right.
You know what I mean? And here's the other thing. Even if it did offend her, have some thick skin and get over yourself.
Well, I was used to working with mechanics.
Yeah.
And I could say things like, "I will take you out back and make you smell your own ass." and are we clear? And they're like, "Yep, got it." And then that shift into, I called it the corporate Coast Guard.
Yeah.
And that was pre-wokeness that we're experiencing now. It was just the beginning of that.
I honestly think that it's going to take a war that we are at risk of losing before our military pulls its head out of its ass. Because once we have an enemy that is a viable threat, because Iraq, Afghanistan, tough fights, right? But Americans' actual security was never really at any type of risk.
Right. Right.
And so if we get into some big, long, drawn-out war with a superpower like China or something, or an army has boots on the ground on our soil, things like that, I think people are going to realize really quick, oh, that's right. Our military, the whole point they even exist is to kill enemies of our country.
Right.
Not to fucking twerk on TikTok and do all this bullshit that we're seeing. And fuck, dude, they had that Navy recruiting video that went out from a transgender sailor. Did you see that shit?
Yes.
And it's that's not what we do, right? And every single person I know that is cut from the cloth that we're cut from. Doesn't care if you're transgender. Like,
Right.
go do you. I don't give a shit.
Right.
But we don't need to change the Navy and the Army for you fuckers.
Right.
It's not necessary. And not only is it not necessary, it's detrimental to the capabilities of these branches of service, because the real war fighters, the guys that are like us, we're not interested in that stuff.
Right.
At all.
Yeah. We never cared.
Yeah.
Never cared. I mean, I grew up in, Boulder, Colorado. There was, back in the 80s, guys with mohawks, purple hair, transgender, it was just weirdness.
Yeah.
But it didn't affect me. And
and now you can't even call it weirdness.
Right.
You're insensitive.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I feel bad.
Yeah. But you're what, 57 now?
57.
So you get to say whatever you want.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
It's a real weird time for our country, Yeah. Because like all of these things that you've been talking about for the last 2 hours, it's a super, super important position that needs to be filled by men and women that are savages.
Right.
That are willing to risk their safety, willing to maintain an elite level of fitness. Like you said, you guys joked about being professional athletes. We used to say the same thing in the Ranger Regiment.
Right.
It was like, our fucking fitness is on a level of a professional athlete, except our game is to go kill bad guys.
Right.
Like that kind of shit is cool. It makes guys feel powerful. It makes guys feel good about what we're doing. You're going to get up and run every fucking morning and smash yourself in the weight room and do all these crazy rucks and workouts and stuff. Like being a motherfucker is part of it.
Right.
And it used to be celebrated. And it's like, if we don't celebrate the men and women that really want to fucking become exceptional and do these crazy, dangerous jobs, well, then who's going to do them? Yeah. Because those are the kind of men and women that are also not going to be interested in partaking in these organizations when they're filled with all the bullshit.
Right.
So it's fucking bizarre.
I wish there was an answer. And I believe those guys are still out there.
Of course they are.
But we've eliminated that path for them. I've always said, I joined the Coast Guard. I came from a great family, close to my dad. So people either running from something or running to something when they join the military.
Yeah.
And I was running to something. I didn't know what it was, but, I didn't leave because I had a horrible family life or any of that. And you've seen that, guys go, yeah,
oh, yeah.
This is my only choice.
I was actually of the very, and I don't know if the Coast Guard got any of these guys, but I was of the very last generation. I had guys in my platoon that had a judge say, hey, you're going to jail or you're going in the Army.
Right. And I've heard that from Coast Guard guy. I never knew if it was true or not.
Yeah.
But depending on who was saying it, I had no doubt that it was true.
And you know what? One Ranger in particular that comes to mind that was put into the Army under those circumstances was one of the best Rangers in the company.
Oh, no doubt.
Because I'll tell his story. I won't tell who it was, but he grew up in Boston and he was at a bar and he was in a fight with some guy and he felt someone grab both shoulders and start pulling him off. And he turned around, just wham. It was a female police officer.
Ooh.
And he knocked her unconscious.
Okay.
And so not good, right? But he's a young, wild fucking dude.
Right.
Perfect fit for the Ranger Regiment.
Right.
And that's what the judge said. You're going to jail, you're going to the Army. What do you want to do? And exceptional Ranger.
Yeah.
And so like, we want people like, it's funny. Like a lot of times you hear from the special operations community, like people put Rangers and SEALs on this pedestal of being these like incredible, amazing people. Man, a lot of us were just young, wild fucking degenerates that needed an outlet.
Yes.
And we found it in the wars,
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. Like take your wild savages and give them an out or an outlet, I should say.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And that's changing for them. And those guys that have that capability, where do they go now? Do they turn criminal?
It's hard to say, man, because like now, if you have anything on your record,
right, like
they're not looking at you now,
right?
Yeah,
you had one too many speeding tickets.
Yeah. Oh, bro, I know. And I don't know what the right answer is because we obviously don't want the military filled with like just fucking hardened criminals,
right?
Right. But one thing that I do think I've thought a lot about this because I was in law enforcement for a decade. The judicial system's kind of weird in the fact that where you get in trouble for something, you get your fine or your jail time or whatever it is, your community service. But then there's a lot of like residual effects that affect employment, affect security clearances, affect all this other stuff. And it's like, well, the foundation of the judicial system should be to punish people and then get them on the right track, right?
Right.
Whereas like, no, now you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do this. So where do all those kids end up? Back on the street banging.
Right.
You know?
Right. It's hanging over them. Yeah.
And again,
totally
I don't have the answer. I've thought a lot about it. I have some ideas, but I would say the current system is probably not optimal.
No. And well, I now find somebody that actually does prosecution.
Dude,
You're not going to find it. Yeah,
no, I know.
It's scary.
So when you decided to retire, then obviously you already had 31 years in.
Right.
And you were just a bad day away from saying, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good spot to be.
Yeah. I actually had looked at career suicide. My last OER or fit rep, whatever you guys used to, I don't know what you call it.
OERs, yeah.
OER. I basically filled it in with a crayon. And my boss like rewrote it. He's like, what do you
He's like, I'm not letting you do this.
I didn't have the balls to quit.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, if I get passed over, it gives me an excuse. And so I made 05, and I'm sure some of my friends are cringing right now. Like, oh, you took my spot. And so, yeah, but then there was a time, there's a shelf life on that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't flying nearly as much. I wasn't standing duty.
Well, and that's inevitable. I mean, the higher rank you get, the less time in the fucking aircraft you have.
Right. But
did you guys did you have warrants at all? Or was it only commissioned officers?
we had warrants, but our warrants didn't fly.
Okay.
So only commissioned officers flew aircraft.
Got it.
So, but yeah, our warrants were like our SMEs. Like my maintenance warrant, I had several of them in my career, but they're amazing.
Yeah, subject matter experts.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, acronyms, right? Acronyms.
No, I actually think that was a good thing that the Army did, was allow warrants to fly.
I do too.
Because now it allowed them, the difference between the warrants and the officers is like, the officers would still hold different leadership positions. Whereas if you're a warrant, you know what your job is flying that bird.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's what they wanted.
Yeah. And we had quite a few warrants that came to the Coast Guard, and they may have come in like an ensign. You know, they had to start at the very bottom, but with their experience and flight time, invaluable.
And then they'd get commissioned, so then they could be
Right.
pilots for the Coast Guard.
Right.
Okay.
Had a lot of them.
And the thing is, I mean, I feel like everybody's got their degree now too.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
Fuck, even I got it.
Yeah. I have it, never used it. Yeah.
Dude, I always tell people is like, I got my degree in exercise physiology just because it interests me.
Right.
And it's never made me 1 cent.
Right.
You know, nothing I do as a coach here at the gym, like everything that I do, I could do the exact same without a fucking 4-year degree in exercise physiology.
Right.
But, for a while there, if you didn't have your degree, like it was like the new high school diploma for a while, I feel like.
Even in the enlisted ranks.
Yeah.
I had a good friend of mine, and he just made senior chief, but that was a semi-requirement that you had some education behind it too.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be, did you know your job?
Shocking.
Can you lead people and know what the mission is?
Yeah.
And now they've added a lot of that extra. To me, it's fluff, but
Of course it's fluff.
Just because you can get a degree doesn't mean you're any better than the next guy that doesn't have one, in my opinion.
Especially if it's not pertinent to the job that you're doing. I tell people all the time, I think if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor or any specific career path that requires very specialized education, okay, college makes sense for you. But just to be like, hey, you know what? I want a degree in poli-sci and I'm never going to use it. Like, what the fuck are people doing?
Right.
You know, the only reason I did it is because I had the GI Bill.
Right.
I was like, well, the Army's going to pay for it. And a statistic of I don't remember exactly what the statistic is, but it's something, a very, very, very small percentage of soldiers uses the GI Bill.
Really?
That was promised to them. Like,
Okay.
and the Army actually counts on that.
Okay.
I've heard that, and again, I'm just fucking spewing the rumor mill, but I've heard that if every person that was eligible for the GI Bill actually went and started using it, that the system wouldn't be able to fucking maintain itself. And so I was like, I'm not going to be.
So, yeah, they hedge on.
Yeah.
Not
I was like,
dipping into that pot of money, and
I was like,
I get it.
And then the other thing about the GI Bill is it comes with a BAH. So you can you're actually making a little money just to go to school. And I was like, I'm down with this.
Yeah.
Yep. And I did it when I was a deputy U.S. Marshal. Because, dude, I came in as a GS5. And bro, Los Angeles, GS5, $47,000 a year.
Right.
And it's like, and this was 2011.
I was doing the math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking embarrassing. I look back on that. I'm like, why did I ever agree to that? Like, you can't raise a family on that. But at the time, I was like, hey, if I grind for a couple of years, I'll be a 13 before I know it. And
right.
Then I'll have made it.
Right. Well, now look at you.
It's bizarre how you look at money.
Yeah.
Coming out of the military, you think $100,000 a year is like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I think they just announced that UPS drivers are going to be making $180K a year now. You hear
Are they
that?
really?
Dude, I heard that. I heard it on Instagram, so it must be true.
It has to be true.
But their union is like, nope, we're going to push for massive pay increases for our drivers. So,
all right. Good luck.
Yeah. Fuck, man. Maybe I'll shut the gym down and go start delivering packages.
Yeah. That thought just went through my head. And because, you got to have money to live. But I'm learning quickly that, whatever's next for me, and I need to brand and move forward in something.
Bro, and brand and move forward in something that and the cool thing is now you have your pension to supplement. You know what I'm saying?
That I share with my mistakes in the past.
Yeah.
So, I don't have the full pension,
yeah.
But I get it.
But it's a little bit of a buffer to be able to use as a platform to jump to your next thing.
Absolutely. Well, and that's I'm blessed that I don't have to worry about my house payment. I don't have to worry about my insurance.
Yeah.
So I'm dabbling and playing and I.
Do you want to do anything with aviation anymore, or are you happy walking away from that?
I'm happy not flying anymore.
Yeah.
I'm involved in it now, in a different role, but consulting for unmanned aircraft companies, working with the FAA.
Okay.
And if Congress doesn't give their shit together by Saturday night, it'll slow down greatly. If we shut down. Yeah. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I actually, my newest quest is through my church. I started a class. I call it the battle plan. And this goes back to reaching that one person.
Yeah.
And it's like a 6-week course. And in churches, a lot of times it's, weak, effeminate men is the standard or what people see. And it's not true. There's some very manly men out there believing in Christ and going to church.
Of course. Yeah.
But the numbers are just like the dad bod. I tell them, dad bods aren't cool, guys. So I run them through, and I tell them I'm not a exercise physiologist. I don't have a degree.
You have a purple belt in jiu-jitsu.
Well, and I experiment on myself. And so we talk about exercise, nutrition, what it's about to be like a real man of God, and not just the guy that goes to church and smiles and says everything's okay. Because I'm trying to build that tribe as well. Because we can sit down at a table and have donuts and go, oh, I'm good. No, it's not what I want. So I take these guys on rucks, and I started doing a self-defense, talk about situational awareness, and I'll bring my mats, and we'll do like an arm drag and a break fall.
Yeah.
And I thought they wouldn't like that. They ate it up.
I love this, dude.
And so I've changed it. Now we're going to have 2 days of that.
Okay.
And usually our brown belt or even our professor will come and help teach that section of the class.
Dude, I think this is the way of the future. And I think it's the way of the future for several reasons. And it's funny you say this because I'm in the process. Me and Tyler Stanaway are launching something very soon that's very similar. And ours is called Forge Ferocity.
Okay.
And the whole premise behind it is you need to build some strength and capability as a man.
Right.
Or a woman too. Like there's plenty of women that want to become more capable. But I think men in particular in today's society are lacking. But not only are they lacking, I think a lot of them are actually reaching a point where they're seeking it or at least desiring it. Maybe they don't even quite know it yet.
Yeah. And in the time we live in now, I mean, turn on social media. you have so many free resources.
Yeah.
And I think the difference is that closeness, physical touch, and I don't mean just rolling, but I mean having a guy walk you through it, not just, oh, I watched this on Instagram and I'm going to be better. You can't read motivational quotes and be motivated.
Nope.
There's no discipline there at all. Zero.
And the thing is, if people are in a place where they're 100 pounds overweight and they hate themselves, they don't possess the discipline yet to get up and go on that ruck,
right,
or step on the mats. But if somebody can, I was going to say hold their hand, that sounds kind of derogatory, but for lack of a better term, it's kind of what you're doing. You know, you're guiding them on this journey as people that have walked this journey. And me and Tyler are going to be very open about it, where it's like, hey, there are realms of our life that we need help too.
Right.
And we seek that help from people that are qualified to give us that help. But in the realm of fitness and combat, like, we excel here, and we can help you excel too. And I think that that's going to be a pretty powerful platform, because one of the biggest things that I get, like I told you, is people saying, hey, you know, I cleaned my diet up after listening to the podcast, and I joined a local gym and I feel better. And it's like, dude, if we can get more people to arrive at a place where they're happier, they're stronger, they're fitter, it starts with one person, but eventually it's your whole community. And eventually it's the entire fucking nation. That's what we need to be doing right now.
Right.
And it's cool seeing, like, you're coming to that same conclusion from a completely different path.
Right.
You know?
Right. And again, it started in my church, and I've done it 3 times. End of the month, I start the 4th round of that.
Okay.
And kind of like Guns and Gis, half the guys are repeat attenders.
Yeah.
And because they'll go and be motivated and not disciplined, and then they fall right back in the, in between sessions.
Yeah.
And then they get like, oh, I need a boost to come back, and welcome, open arms. Come on.
And it's easy to be motivated right after something like that. But then when you got to get up and go to work and wake up and prep your meals and stuff, like, the grind can start to wear you out again.
Right.
And like, we're fortunate, I feel like, because my Guns and Gis is right on the other side of that door.
Right.
I get it every single night. Right. But a lot of people that don't have that, you're right. We get people that have been to, like, we're on class 10 coming up, and we've had people that have attended 4.
Okay.
And straight up, that's what they say. They're like, I need to knock the dust off. I need to hang around you guys. I need to hang around people that want to be better. I need to push myself out of my comfort zone. And then it reinvigorates them to go out there and put the work in for the next however many months.
Right.
And then when they feel, and bro, every single one of us has that voice in the back of our head that wants us to be lazy, wants us to not put the work in. Once that voice starts to get a little loud, let's go sign back up and do something hard again.
When my alarm goes off at 5 for our 6 a.m. class, I don't want to get out of bed.
Dude.
Or I'm sitting in my lazy boy and going, I guess I better get down to the academy. It's a
crazy, you crazy 6 a.m. guys. Yeah, I am not fighting someone at 6 a.m. unless they break into my house.
So our 6 a.m. class, we do have a lot of guys at work that are white belts. And so there's some fundamentals, but I call it the workshop.
Okay.
So we don't roll hard, because I roll hard Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. And then schedule allow, I'll go to the morning classes.
Yep.
Because I have to keep moving.
Okay.
Because if I don't train, my body's not recovering as quickly as it used to. And so I'll use that as my skill building.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
And you'll see tonight, but I was shocked when I got my purple belt. And again, trust the system, right? Trust the system.
I always tell people, because I've had students that feel like they're not worthy of something, right? But if you say you're not worthy of a purple belt that your professor tied on you, that's not a dig about your jiu-jitsu.
Right.
That's a dig at him.
Right.
I know. He knows what the fuck a purple belt is.
We had that conversation. Yeah. And he's like, trust process. I'm like, all right, boss.
Yep.
Got it. Let's keep rolling.
And the cool thing that I've seen I've seen this more with purple and brown than any other belt. When you tie one of those belts on someone, man, they know I have to rise to the occasion. And a lot of times that extra little boost is what they need.
Yeah.
To step to the next level of jiu-jitsu.
Right.
Like, I'm not giving anyone a purple belt unless they have exceptional jiu-jitsu.
Right.
Like, you need to know a blue belt, I feel like, is like you learned all the fundamentals. You understand how jiu-jitsu works now.
Right.
A purple belt, you understand pretty much everything about jiu-jitsu. Now the next 2 belts, you're just continuously honing that.
Right. In my journey now, it's the linking.
Yeah.
And 2 moves ahead.
Yep.
Like if I go here and he goes there, this is what I really want to do.
Dude, isn't it fun?
Yeah.
It's
mental
fascinating,
chess,
dude.
Mental chess.
And I'm starting to find like these little tiny tricks that just put me so far ahead in the fight. Like one thing I've been doing, anytime I have someone mounted, I'll take my forearm and I'll put their head just out of alignment that far.
Right.
Like if you're looking, it doesn't even look like anything, right? But when your neck is out of alignment, suddenly bucking becomes exponentially more difficult. Turning your body becomes more difficult. Trying to get a frame in, like no, we don't do anything athletic like this.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That makes sense. I
and
like it.
So like I've just been playing with these little tiny tricks like that. Or another thing that I've been doing is trying to exclusively nasal breathe while I roll.
Okay.
Because like fatigue makes cowards of us all, right?
Right.
And if you see your opponent fatiguing, man, you're taking their soul.
Right.
And I'm charging my soul with it, you know? And so like I never want anyone to know that I'm tired.
Right.
And I'm not saying I'm not tired. I just want to mask it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and that's
all these little things, man.
That's my 25-year-old brain and my 57-year-old body.
Uh-huh.
So, and I'm learning. I call it the executive privilege. There's guys I just won't. Like we have a D1 wrestler, blue belt.
Yeah.
220 pounds. I'm like, yeah, no, not happening.
Yeah.
I'm here for a long time, and I don't need to get hurt. But most white belts, I'll roll with them because I like that.
Yeah.
I just wear them down and then, have your way.
Dude, it's awesome.
I'm excited for tonight.
Tonight's going to be fun. We have a huge turnout on Friday night.
Okay, good.
Friday night, I mean, I won't be surprised if we have 45 people here tonight.
Wow.
Like the mats are packed.
Okay.
And I say that now, it'll probably be a ghost town.
Yeah, 6 guys.
But I've already been looking at our mat room thinking like, dude, it's almost too small already.
Yeah, you knock on a wall. And, yep, let's build on.
Just continuously expand and expand. That's the mission, What is your program that you're starting to develop? Is there anything that's actually like for people that are interested? Do you have anything set up? Do you have any social media about it? Or is it just word of mouth through your church right now?
Just word of mouth through my church. And
okay.
I don't know if you've heard of a guy named Kyle Thompson. He's a podcaster.
It's not ringing a bell.
Undaunted Life.
Okay.
And he's a Christian. He's a purple belt. And this has been his whole mission.
Okay.
And I started listening to him. I reached out to him. I'm like, hey, bro.
Is he a local guy?
No, he's out of Oklahoma.
Okay.
And he had just had Glover on his show a few months ago.
Okay.
So he's kind of getting tied into the guys you were tied into. And I reached out to him and I said, I like what you're doing. I like a lot of the stuff you're saying. Can I use that? And he's like, hell yeah, you can use that. He goes, have at it.
Nice.
And let's grow this.
Yeah.
And again, right now it's through the church, but right now that's another one of my tribes.
Yep.
So if I can help them and, bring them to grappling and bring them to class, through this and have a better life.
For sure.
And if one guy decides to go do jiu-jitsu because he hung out with us, it's a victory.
Yeah.
It's a win.
Well, and then the other side of this that like nobody ever wants to talk about, like if you can build programs that start to enrich everybody's life while simultaneously making that lucrative for yourself, there's nothing wrong with that either.
Right.
Do you know who Wes Watson is?
I don't.
So he's this dude on Instagram who's like, he did 10 years in the penitentiary. And the whole time he was in, he's like, when I get out, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. Like,
is he the prison fit guy or the con fit?
He might have something called that.
Okay. Yeah.
He's all jacked and he's like bald guy with a beard and he's just fucking covered in tattoos.
Maybe a different guy, but yeah. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
But anyway, like, dude, so many people are fucking like buying his programs to health and fitness. And dude, it's like, when you hear the stuff that he's saying, it's like, yeah, of course, like get up and do a bunch of burpees and just like,
Right.
you know, he's on the path of fucking being on the grind. And that dude's making $2 million a month now.
Wow. Good for him.
Through his personal like excellence program that he built on the internet. And it's like, again, like as a police officer, especially as an E5, what was I making as an E5? Like 30 something a year or something, you know? You think like, oh, well, now I'm a police officer and I'm making 100, right? There's fucking people out there making that every day.
Right.
And just like you said about the pilot, when you realize like, that guy's no smarter than I am.
Right.
Right. And so I've talked to my wife about this. I'm like, man, like there's people that are becoming exceptionally wealthy. We could be those people. There's no reason we can't be if that's what we want to do. And instead of money like being demonized, man, if good people are getting wealthy and doing good things with the money, that's what we should be doing.
Right. And,
you know?
and it's run with integrity and honor and all of that. Yeah.
And all of our adversaries are billionaires in DC. Like all the people in the swamp and all the corruption, they have no problem becoming billionaires on $120,000 a year salary. So you know what? I can do that too.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to have no shame in it when I get there.
Oh, you got me fired up now.
Dude, because it's like, that's part of the world that we live in, you know? And I have no intent on ever trying to fucking drive a Ferrari or any of that kind of shit. But I do want to have a nice house out in the mountains.
Right.
I do want to have a fucking nice sailboat to fucking disappear for a while. All that shit takes money. So let's build a path and get there, you know?
I got to build a compound for all my kids.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And I want to do that too.
Yeah.
And if you are enriching people's lives while simultaneously making some money, and that what I see in that is everybody wins, you know, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, fuck, we're at 2:10, man. It's time to wrap this up.
That went fast.
And you're a fascinating guest, so I'm sure we'll circle back at some time. Like,
all right.
We had good vibes, good energy.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
It was a fun time. Do you have any type of way for people to contact you if that one person does hear you and have questions?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, and it's Russ Torg, so RUSSTORG.
Okay.
On Instagram.
So are you comfortable if I add that in the show notes below?
Absolutely.
Cool. So
I don't have a whole lot posted on there.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to answer some DMs or whatever.
Okay.
Like I said, reach out. Let's do this.
A lot of people that do the show have people reaching out, and you'll get people reaching out that are like young kids interested in joining the Coast Guard or whatever it may be, like a piece of your story. They want to connect with you. And that's one of the beautiful things about social media is now it's available, you know? So any final words before we wrap this up?
No, just thanks what you're doing. It's, through experiencing Guns and Gis and, of course, the Jiu-jitsu family. And we didn't talk nearly enough about Jiu-jitsu on this podcast.
The next episode, we'll just do a whole hour of Jiu-jitsu.
But again, if you're listening to this and you want help and you want to get healthy and get motivated, reach out. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And I'm just honored to be part of this tribe. And this is ego. You pulled me aside after Guns and Gis, and you said, dude, you're a fucking savage. And I was like, told my wife, I'm like, Greg called me a savage.
Bro, you're flying helicopters at night in 50-foot oceans, scooping dudes out that if you weren't there, they're dead.
Right.
That's fucking savage, dude.
And people that hear this that knew me 10 years ago wouldn't recognize me. I was a puffy-faced fat fuck and not living a good life. And it's all changed.
Hell yeah, it has, dude. Well, I appreciate you coming out, spending the time. I know it was a long drive coming out here, but I'm looking forward to training tonight. Let's get some hard rolls in. And most importantly, I'm excited for you to meet the team, man.
Yeah, let's do this.
Cool. All right, I appreciate it, brother.
Thanks, brother.